hasta luego. Hi, everybody. So nice to see you all. This is a big room, so I'm glad people are scattered. My name is Rana Lapine. I'm Mohawk, and I work with G4GC. Our old name was Grantmakers for Girls of Color. We're still doing the same work. We are a funding intermediary that is explicitly focused on resourcing girls and gender-expansive youth of color. And I have the honor of leading our New Songs Rising initiative, which is a grant-making fund held in partnership with the 7th Generation Fund for Indigenous Peoples. And it is exclusively based on funding Native and Globally Indigenous girls, Two-Spirit youth, and gender nonconforming young people and their communities. In a little bit, we're going to hear from some phenomenal panelists who will introduce themselves, but I want to do a little bit of context setting and a little bit of housekeeping. So up in the front, there are some index cards on these tables. You don't need them this second, but at the end of our panel, we're going to do a little activity with you all where you might want to use them. So just flagging that they're there. And if at any point when you're hearing from our wonderful fellows here, if you hear something and you think, I don't actually think that's the way that should work, or you think, oh, we could probably do that, or oh, I kind of want to learn about how I could maybe apply that to my work, I ask you to consider that and then come back to it in the activity. So I'm going to pass it over to our fellows, and then I'll talk a little bit about our program, and then we'll have our panel. Nyawa.
Good morning, everyone. My Inupiaq name is Arpunga. My English name is Sunny. I am Inupiaq and Mexican. My dad's side of the family is from Guadalajara, Mexico. My mom's side of the family is from Barrow or Utqiagvik, Alaska, way up north. I am a former fellow with the New Songs Rising initiative with G4GC. I am also the daughter of a first-generation immigrant from Mexico, and I also carry the lineage of having a family that has been in this country for thousands of years. So I am very proud to be both an immigrant and an Indigenous person. I'm also an organizer at Native Movement, and I live at Chino, also known as Fairbanks, Alaska, on Lower Tanana lands.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elise Bollinger. My Osage name is Wajaje Mitsechi. I'm a citizen of the Osage Nation. I'm an Eagle Feather Fellow with 7th Generation Fund, and I'm also a current graduate student in art history at the University of Arkansas. I am originally from both Oklahoma and Arkansas, and I'm so thankful to be here with you all today.
Oki Nistu Nanto Okiotokiaki. My name is Jaya King. I'm from the Blackfeet Reservation in Browning, Montana. I am currently finishing my BFA in film writing and interdisciplinary studio art in San Francisco, California. I am an Eagle Feather Fellow, and I have also just received All College Honors Award from my university, and I'm an American Indian Cultural Center of SF Artist Fellow of 2023. Thank you.
Nawa, waiti stagishu garit, waiti winetina, waiti nuetsa naharatsa nasahnish nation. Hello everyone, my name is Ambrosia Yellowbird. I am an enrolled member of the 3 affiliated tribes, the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation in North Dakota. My ancestors know me as Sweet Pine Woman. I am currently a graduate student at the University of North Dakota studying community mental health counseling, and my pronouns are she, her. And I am also a former fellow of the New Songs Rising initiative from G4GC.
Nyawa, thank you all. So before we hear from our incredible, I'm loud, sorry. I talk really loud because I'm from the East Coast. But before we hear from our incredible panelists, I just want to do a little bit of defining. I guess it wouldn't be philanthropy if we weren't trying to define things. So we're going to talk a little bit about these terms, ceding and ceding. It's language that we've drawn upon from our CEO, Dr. Monique Kuvsin, who uses this frequently. And the idea is that these are 2 different ways of really growing our young folks and also acknowledging the power of our young people and not just waiting for them to be at another stage in life to be making decisions. So we have Ceding, S-E-E-D, Ceding, which is really nurturing and growing the leadership of our youth and helping them feel prepared so that society is acknowledging their power and their leadership and so that they feel ready to take on these sorts of projects and situations. And then we have Ceding, C-E-D-E, seed, in which we are, of course, taking something that is currently being held by folks who have a little more power, funding, decision-making, what have you, and we are shifting it so that the young people are the ones who are making those decisions. And so each of our 4 panelists are going to tell you a little bit about things that sort of embody that experience, right? All of them were involved in these 2 fellowships, and the context that's important here is that our New Songs Rising Fellows, their process was an 18-month fellowship, sounds long, it flew by, in which they really focused on growing their sense of community belonging. They talked with other sort of experts and leaders in the field, they had skill building, and they went through a participatory process in which they presented a project that was important to them and their community, and then they worked with one another to determine the urgency and the funding and its relationship with our mission. The Eagle Feather Fellows have also had a project that was investing directly in their community, in which they had their personal projects funded, and they worked with their community to create a project. And so 2 sort of separate examples of investing in young folks in different ways that we hope that other funders will sort of be inspired by or replicate, or basically have young folks make a few more decisions. So I'm going to start with Sunny. You selected Native Movement for your participatory grant, and like you said, you work with them, and you had also seen them in your community doing important work. I'm thinking a little bit about what it means to be a community member in a grant-making process, and I'm wondering if you can talk about how the impact changes when you have community members making these decisions about receiving funding, as opposed to the typical sort of application process.
Yeah, thank you. So some background, I work at a nonprofit called Native Movement that is an Indigenous-led nonprofit. We do work in several different areas like climate justice, gender justice, and policy justice. And some more background about Alaska, and I'm sure that this is true for many Indigenous and Hispanic communities, is that in my experience and what I've heard from stories from friends that have been in this work longer than I have, that it's not uncommon for funders to kind of parachute into communities and then run a campaign for a couple of months and then leave without actually building just and sustainable relationships with the communities most impacted by the issues. And maybe also only see the work as checking off boxes for their grants or for the partners or the funders that they have as well. But in my time with Native Movement and also with G4GC, I've witnessed what true intentionality and grounding in Indigenous values and the valuation of Indigenous youth looks like, especially when it comes to deciding funding recipients. And in our communities, and youth are always involved in the work in both of these circles and these organizations, either from being on our advisory board or our board of directors, doing the organizing, or actually directly benefiting from the system or the spaces that we're trying to create for Indigenous youth. At Native Movement, we not only do a lot of front-facing work, which is the work that I do that includes event planning, relational organizing, and campaign building, but we also fiscally sponsor over 21 organizations across the state, which are grassroots initiatives that are created by and for Indigenous communities most impacted by the issues that they identify and want to fix. And I can talk about that for a long time, so if you want to find me after this panel, and I'm happy to share more about that. But at Native Movement, we've also distributed over $1 million from our movement fund in 2024 alone, which also includes our Land Back Fund to help create location-specific learning and wellness spaces in Alaska, which also includes revitalizing our traditions, like skill sharing of our land-based knowledge, especially with Indigenous youth through hide camps and fish camps, which is especially needed during these times. But of course, these relationships are more than just redistributing funds. Our fundraising committee is made up of advisory board members from all over Alaska, especially rural Alaska, who help award these grants to rural and Indigenous communities across the state. This participatory process not only allows for Alaska Natives from all regions to support the grant-making process, but it has also helped to get the word out to communities that otherwise may not have been aware of the opportunities that we have. Our recipients and board are chosen not only because they align with our goals, mission, and visions as an organization, but they've also demonstrated to be accountable to their communities and youth through their work, and also through generations of ancestral knowledge. And these are things that funders who are not based in our state or connected with our communities otherwise may not have been able to accomplish if organizations like Native Movement or G4GC didn't know the importance of ceding and ceding power to Indigenous youth.
Yeah, well, thank you. Love that. So Elise, obviously you're next in the line. I have a question for you around, you have talked many times when we've connected about the real importance of having enough space and time for a community to really give their input on a project. And I think unfortunately a lot of the time funders say like, oh, we gotta meet the timeline, we're not ready, or wrap it up, what's your outcome, what's your metric? I'm curious if you can talk about your project as an Eagle Feather Fellow and sort of how you waited and worked with community to get their feedback. And then if you can also mention sort of what you needed in structure to have the space for guidance.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rana. I hope everybody can hear me. So as I said, I'm a citizen of the Osage Nation, and when I first became Eagle Feather Fellow, I was finishing up my undergraduate degree at Fort Lewis College, a non-tribal Native serving institution, and I had been tasked with taking on reconciliation for the institution of its boarding school history. So I was working a lot with students at the college to put together an exhibition surrounding trauma from the boarding school era, and was really moved by the opportunity that I had there to work with youth and young people, and oftentimes I would encourage them to reach out to their families and bring intergenerational conversations into the fold. So for my project with Seventh Generation Fund, I wanted to do something similar, but I wanted to turn back to my community. I was really far from home, so I wanted to have the time and resources to go back to Oklahoma, to Pahuska, and talk with Osage women. So the project that I came up with was a book, and I wanted to conduct oral history interviews with Osage women and gather art pieces and other creative works and compile them all into this book and kind of create a community in and of itself, but also kind of tend to what's already happening in my community by uplifting and honoring these women who do so much for us. So it was really important to me also to go before the Traditional Cultural Advisory Panel, which is a committee of appointed individuals within my nation, and kind of explain to them my idea as well as get their guidance on my project. And they were like, this is so important, we're so glad that you came to us with this, but you need to talk to all the cooks, and you need to talk to this woman and this family, and do this and do this. And I was like, wow, this is so exciting, this is gonna expand in so many ways, and this is gonna take a really long time. And so going back to Seventh Generation Fund and explaining that, they said, that's perfectly fine, and we love that, and we wanna give you as much time as possible. And that was really empowering, and so that's what I really needed, was that encouragement and that mentorship, but also the recognition that I was being very diligent toward my project. Even if I didn't have a product to show within the first few months like I thought I would, I had a lot of conversations to share and things I had learned and things I was working toward and still am. So that is what has been most important for me, and I think the Eagle Feather Fellowship really focuses on sisterhood and leadership, and so I feel like I've really had that time to delve into those aspects of myself while going back to my community and The biggest part of my project that I've been focusing on is the way that intergenerational knowledge passes. And so I've asked several women and had conversations with them to participate in this project with me, and they're helping me shape it. And that was the intention all along. So I hope that the product, once I get further down the line and create the book, it will be an offering for those who were involved, but also for future Osage women. And it's really about turning back toward us and feeling empowered in who we are. And a lot of the women I've spoken to, they've said, oh, I'm not an Osage woman enough, I'm not the example. And I'm like, you're the epitome of an Osage woman. So it's really about the collective of all of our voices, and that's the intention of the book. So thank you.
Yeah. So Jaya, I want to talk to you a little bit about maybe some of the expectations that folks have, good or bad, of our young people. I think we often hear that unfortunately a lot of funders still don't see youth as change makers in their communities. We hear all the time in our space as funders for youth around this question of like, oh, what's their experience? Or do they really know the context? Or are they going to be too rushed? I'm wondering if you can talk about, when you did your project, what your expectations were there around how you thought you might be received, and maybe what those barriers might have been versus what the actual reception was when you started doing the work?
Yes. I think my background, to preface, really helped prepare me to carry out the Eagle Feather Fellowship project. I originally, when I turned 20, I started interning for the Montana Racial Equity Project and doing education reform and advocacy, and also managing the COVID-19 fund we had. And then I also moved on to like voter registration and organizing after that. And I think those 2 points helped really prepare me to take on the fellowship. And so my project was originally to do a documentary on, and using documentary as a tool for healing, on naming ceremonies and naming in Blackfeet culture, specifically within my family lineage. I think going through that process, my project started to change, and I started noticing patterns of how adoption and boarding schools in my family. My grandmother was a boarding school survivor, and my father was adopted out before the ICWA Act. And I think the documentary then formed into how tools for assimilation had affected my family and our connection to culture, but then also language, and how a through line had been that connection, despite varying levels of cultural connection. Like most of everyone in my family made it a priority to get their name in Blackfeet. I think my hesitations going in with this project were around extractive filmmaking. I think documentary. Oh, can you hear me? Okay, thank you. I think documentary filmmaking has been used in communities of color and also Indigenous communities in historically an extractive way. And so my goal was to do everything I could to avoid that and make it, a communal process. So I went to other Native filmmakers for advice, other Blackfeet filmmakers for advice, and learned what I could and how I could make this documentary and process culturally competent. And I think what I really learned was that the community wanted to hug me basically and hold me and bring me in and support me throughout the process. And it's still ongoing. I think Elise's project, as she talked about, you kind of have to go with the spirit of the project and the time, and you can't really rush that. And I think that's something I've really appreciated with 7th Gen, supporting that. And I've learned a lot about how much the community has really wanted to support and just help create awareness, and also help use documentary as a tool for healing and advocacy within the community.
Thank you. So, Ambrosia, you were really personally influential in the way that the New Songs Rising initiative thinks about how to resource work that responds to the murdered and missing Indigenous women, exploited relatives. I should have had less coffee. Let me rephrase that. So you were influential in shaping our response to murdered, missing Indigenous women and exploited relatives, and even down to sort of the framing of that sort of work. And you also chose a participatory grant that was responding to that crisis in your own community. I'm wondering if you can talk about your thoughts on how funders should be thinking about this crisis and maybe shifting their thinking of it and how to respond to it. And if you can also speak on how the fact that that project received general support as opposed to a more strict project expectation might have had a different impact for her.
Yeah. So before I start, I would like to apologize for speaking in front of any elders here. That's just something we do in my community. But the epidemic of missing, murdered, and exploited Indigenous relatives is something that affects every Native community, as I'm sure a lot of people here know. Every Native family has a story, including mine. Since I was a teenager, I've been marching, organizing, meeting with public officials, just to help raise awareness and demand change. My aunt, Lissa Yellowbird, has been one of my biggest inspirations in this process. About 15 years ago, she founded the Sonish Scouts on our reservation, the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation in northwest North Dakota. Sonish is the name of our people, though we're often referred to as the Arikara. And just like the Scouts of our history, my aunt has dedicated her life to searching for our missing relatives across the United States. She's developed effective community-based protocols for finding missing and exploited people. She trains law enforcement, schools, tribal organizations, and so on. So when I joined the New Songs Rising initiative as a fellow, choosing to advocate for the Sonish Scouts during our participatory grant-making process was deeply personal and absolutely necessary. Being a part of this process has allowed me to do more than just tell our stories. I got to shift power. Pushing for my peers to understand how general operating support could sustain this life-saving work. I also advocated for us to expand the language we use from missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls to missing, murdered, and exploited Indigenous relatives. This term doesn't just name the root issue, which is exploitation. It's also more inclusive of the many who are impacted. In the United States, 69% of missing Indigenous people are men. Indigenous Two-Spirit people also face staggering rates of gender-based violence, up to 85%. And Indigenous women remain disproportionately targeted, with murder being the third leading cause of our deaths. But without naming exploitation, we ignore the mechanisms that allow this crisis to persist. Exploitation is the thread that connects all of this. It shows up in human trafficking, in unsafe housing, extractive industries that bring transient workers and man camps to tribal lands. It's in how media devalues Indigenous lives, how police fail to investigate our cases, and how systems profit off of our suffering. Exploitation is what happens when our communities are viewed as disposable, when we're denied protection, resources, and dignity. MMEIR is deeply rooted in colonization, systemic racism, land theft, and a pattern of erasure. Historical traumas such as residential schools, forced relocation, and cultural suppression continue to shape the way we face violence today. The crisis is worsened by underfunded tribal law enforcement, jurisdictional gaps, and a lack of accountability from federal and state governments. But grassroots work, such as my aunt's, offers a different path forward, one grounded in Indigenous knowledge, care, and resistance. With the General Operating Support Grant from G4GC and the 7th Generation Fund, Sonish Scouts has been able to train communities, lead searches, and help families find closure. This flexible funding allows her to respond quickly, educate others, and continue building a safety net that our systems in place have failed to provide for us. This is what participatory grant making is about. Putting trust in community leadership, uplifting youth voices, and investing in solutions that come from the people most impacted. I'm proud to have played a part in resourcing this critical movement, not just as an advocate, but as someone who understands this work is about protecting our relatives and about reclaiming our future. Thank you.
So we want to open this up to you all. We have about probably 10 minutes or so for some Q&A, so you can speak directly with our incredible fellows. We'll also all be here for the next 2 days, so find us after if you're shy. But we want to make sure that you get a chance to directly address these folks, and then we'll move into our activity after. So I'm going to pause. I think there might be microphones somewhere. Is that right? Corey? No? Someone somewhere has one, I'm sure. Okay, we'll figure it out. But if you have a question, I invite you to, come and ask our folks. And we have about, like I said, a little under 10 minutes or so for that. So, yeah, sure. Yeah, she's coming.
Thank you all. It was really incredible to hear from all of you. Ambrosia, I want to thank you specifically for what you shared around your work with MMEIR. I am the Community Engagement Coordinator at the American Indians in Texas at the Spanish Colonial Missions, and I am the lead coordinator for our Pilam Taptai initiative, which is our work around missing and murdered Indigenous women and people. And so first of all, I just want to thank you explicitly for, that shift in language to missing and murdered and exploited Indigenous relatives. I think that that's really important. And I'm also wondering if you or anybody else on the panel has any feedback or advice. I live and I work in San Antonio, Texas, which is a place where most people don't think Native people still exist. And particularly, right, in Texas, there are, in the county that we work in, there are 67,000 plus Indigenous people living there according to the 2020 census. So that was also 5 years ago. And those numbers have only been rising significantly. So I'm just wondering, I guess I don't have like a direct question per se, but advocacy work around missing and murdered Indigenous relatives is hard enough anywhere as it is, let alone in a state like Texas where so many people refuse to acknowledge that there are still Indigenous people there, that there are still people that are from those lands there, let alone so many people moving into these urban areas as well.
Yeah, so I would say, personally, I also have a connection to Texas. I grew up in Austin, Texas, in the suburbs, Round Rock, if you know where that is. So I completely understand that growing up as well. I was told a lot of times, that I wasn't Indigenous. People didn't believe that I was Indigenous. People didn't, they had never heard of a tribe from North Dakota either, especially. So I can definitely relate to that. I think, honestly, the biggest thing right now, besides, understanding the verbiage and really pointing out that exploitation is a huge issue and addressing that, I would say, the trainings that my aunt does, she goes all over the world. She does all types of things. She helps different types of communities, even like schools and such like that. She's available for workshops. I would say that would probably be my biggest recommendation, is to just look up Sonish Scouts on Facebook. If you're also interested in learning about her journey in general, there was a book written about her by Sierra Crane Murdoch. It's called Yellowbird. It's a Pulitzer Prize finalist. So I would suggest just looking that up. Other than that, I would just suggest, continuing to educate yourself. I think we're all on this journey of education. It's a lifelong thing. And if you see something, say something. That's one of the biggest things. I think the bystander effect is so hurtful in Indigenous communities, especially for people, like me as a woman. When I see something happening, I don't always want to necessarily say something to put myself at risk, but community is what keeps us safe. We keep us safe. So I think that's a really big thing too. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm always clapping. Are there other questions? Oh, there we go.
Yeah, hello, my name is Brandon. I did have a question for the panel to see if you had thoughts about, I find that talking to youth oftentimes and defining youth could be a different question, but like how we talk about things that have already been done by older folks, elders in the community, but there's oftentimes not a lot of space for that sort of communication or conversation between the elders and the youth so it's like we're just redoing the same things over and over again. And I wonder if you all have any examples or thoughts about how, we could facilitate that knowledge sharing between elders and youth in a way where elders aren't telling youth what to do and like not stepping on their toes, but rather empowering youth to take the lead, but in a way where they understand the legacy that they're coming from and that they're building on. And something my org's kind of in the same vein struggling with is how do we, as funders, contribute to that youth organizing work, whether it's convening space or funding space, where should we be putting our effort to like support this without, again, stepping on the youth voice or youth decision making?
I have a direct response to that. Yeah, in Alaska, we especially have a space dedicated to that called the Elders and Youth Conference that happens right before our Alaska Federation of Natives, which is the largest convening of Alaska Natives in the state. But I think my biggest piece of advice is like just not only creating the space to have those facilitated discussions, but also remembering that there are a lot of youth that want to have these discussions with elders. It's oftentimes that we're just like trying to focus on surviving in this economy and being able to make ends meet. And it's really just creating the opportunities, staying receptive to building those relationships, and meeting youth where they're at instead of trying to create these obstacles or these benchmarks that people often perceive as where youth should be, especially Indigenous youth. Just remembering that there are a lot of youth that want to have those relationships. It's oftentimes that the opportunities aren't created yet for them. So that's why I'm really grateful for G4GC, because they're able to meet us where we're at and are making sure that we're cared for on a basic level to make sure that we're able to show up as our best selves as well.
Thank you, Sunny. I think we probably have time for 2 more questions. It looks like we have one there, and then I saw your hand's been up for a while, so.
Quick question here, and maybe for everybody, or maybe 1 or 2. I just hear all your guys' work. It sounds like you're all artists. So could you tell me a little bit about how art plays a role as a catalyst for your change work that you guys are doing? So, and I'm Northern Cheyenne, so I'm congratulations on all your work, and you inspire me. So thank you so much.
I can go. Let's see. I think I started going to art school, and I think when I got there, I started focusing on how I could use art as a tool for healing within my own family, healing like intergenerational trauma, and I think it's been very helpful with that. And I think also just like traditional like beading or belt making. I made this belt, but at the health center in San Francisco, there's a few amazing women that lead art workshops, and I think the most healing thing has been just sitting among relatives of all ages and beading together and making things and doing talking circles while that's happening. I think like those more intimate spaces have been the most healing and helpful for me.
I'd also like to respond to that. Thanks, Jaya. I also did an undergraduate degree in studio art, and I work in arts institutions. I've been a curatorial fellow and a curatorial research assistant on several exhibitions of Native art. And so a lot of my interaction with Indigenous communities is through their belongings that were either stolen or donated to a museum by a random person. So that's really difficult work, but so necessary. And my project with the Eagle Feather Fellowship was really about giving myself an opportunity to engage with other Osage women artists outside of an institutional setting. And so Seventh Generation Fund is really giving me that opportunity to lead that conversation myself, rather than having to go through a museum or an academic space who won't understand my goals and outcomes and intentions. Just inherently. So yeah, arts are so important, and also I wanted to add that there are so many of our pieces in art museums, and then when we're in community or when we're in an academic space, they aren't honored as art. And so I've been working on that as well, trying to define art in an Osage worldview. Check back with me later on that, and yeah, that's all I have to say.
Hi friends, I'm Brent Spector. I'm the Director of Communications and Advocacy at Justice Outside. We're also an intermediary organization. And thank you so much for the panel and for sharing all of your amazing stories. And I would say that our grant-making team does a really great job at keeping connections with our grantees, doing site visits, sharing resources and opportunities. And obviously we have conversations with bigger funders. I know some of you may be in the room, not trying to call you out, we love you. But to the point that was made by the panel, when we're having conversations with these bigger funders, how do we help them understand we're not just like a checkbox list? How do we help them understand of the difficulties that some people may have with submitting reports and like bandwidth, and that they're looking for really like a human connection, and for them to really see where their funds can impact that community. You know, why site visits are so important. How do we have those conversations? I would just love the panel if y'all have any advice on that. Thank you.
I'm happy to say something quickly, and then while folks sort of gather their thoughts. The first thing I want to say is there's so many incredible organizations who are doing that sort of work and who have built, decades of work. I think of the folks, who I see some of them here, right? Like I see California Tribal Fund in the back. Hey, Rebecca. But First Nations Development Institute has had decades of work of making this case of why you should be funding, not only funding Native communities, but respecting sovereignty in the way that you do that, right? I think also NAP has had some phenomenal reports. I didn't get to go to the session this morning because we were preparing, but someone was telling me yesterday about a new report that NAP worked on with a few other groups around sort of making the case for why funders should be funding our communities. And I think with youth also, we find at G4GC, reminding funders, like, our young people are not just like a cute topic, right? Yeah, they all look great, but at the same time, like, they're doing real work. They're organizing. They're not just folks that you're incubating to be leaders in 30 years. And so that's something that we think about a lot in our sort of donor organizing work at G4GC, of just showing people the work. And the other thing I want to say quickly before I pass it over is I think when it comes to site visits and things, on one hand, I'm very conflicted, because on one hand, I feel like there is nothing like showing up in community and having somebody's auntie feed you and laugh with you, but I also think we have to be honest about philanthropy's real exploitation in these spaces. We've seen so many times funders come in, they take pictures of kids, dancing in their regalia, they take pictures of this and that, they have 2 years of funding, often with really restrictive practices, and then they use the pictures for 20 years and they don't come back. And so I think it's also a matter of really talking to folks and saying, like, what's the actual impact here? You want to come to our community, this is reciprocal. You're not just getting pictures and giving us money, like, this is a two-way situation. So I'll pass it to our panelists, but that's sort of my first response in terms of what we at G4GC are thinking. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I am very new to the grant making world and the funding world, but I really resonate with everything that you have said, and I honestly don't have an answer to that. Like, I think that if I were to hold more decision-making power in having where our funds go, I would make sure that our funders are aligned with our values, because the last thing I want is to take money and be indebted to somebody that doesn't see the long-term goal and the long-term vision of what our communities stand for. And I think that our existence is inherently political, and if a funder can't respect that and doesn't understand what that means, then I don't want their money. Just like, plain words, but I think that there is a way to create a sustainable future where we are aligned with our values and aligned with our Indigenous worldviews, and there are people that are wanting to also make that happen. So if there's somebody out there that wants to make that happen with us, then please come talk to us as youth, because we have the vision of what we want our futures to look like as well and as possible. So thank you.
So now we're going to shift. We have a couple minutes. We have about 5 minutes for a little audience activity. So we have some index cards up here at the front tables. And what I want to invite you all to do is just to think a little bit about what you heard from our panelists and going back to this idea of ceding and ceding power in your work. And I'm wondering if folks would mind just jotting down maybe one way that you might be able to implement either something you learned here, maybe something you heard and you didn't like, that you were like, I wouldn't do it that way. That's constructive, that's helpful. To jot something like that down. And then afterwards, we're going to try to build some accountability because, I'm grateful for philanthropy, and sometimes folks come into these spaces and they're like, oh, I want to do this thing, and then you see them a year later and nothing has changed. And so this is hopefully going to be a tool where we will follow up in the future. So I just want to give you about 3 minutes to write something down, if you're open to it, about how you might implement something here to shift power, right, to youth, whether it's participatory work, leadership development, what have you. And I'll tell you, I won't keep talking, I promise. I'll tell you when that time is up. And then if afterwards, if you can write your email at the bottom, we'll talk about the next step. Thank you. I wish we had music.
Should we do the closing remarks?
Yeah, so we're gonna, one thing I say. And about a minute left, but don't worry, you can keep working on it after. There's no rush. Sorry? Oh, so there's a request to repeat the question. So I'm asking folks to think of one way in your work that you can shift something so that youth are making a decision or growing their leadership to be ready to take on another aspect of that decision making. Okay, you can keep writing, but we are going to shift to our closing remarks. So I'm actually going to make sure that we end the panel with our incredible panelists' voices. So I'm going to have a quick little sentence here, and then I'm going to pass it over. I want to thank NAP for giving us, and HIP for giving us the opportunity to speak, and all of you. This was a very engaged audience. I didn't know what to expect, and for many of us, it's our first time coming up on a stage and talking about our work. So Nyala for listening and being here. And I also just want to make a pitch to those folks who, whether you are a community project, I am hoping that you all are meeting with funders here. I feel like y'all should not have to do the, bulk of the work in these spaces. But if you are a funder, I really want to make a pitch to make sure you're investing in our young people, across their different identities, right? And recognizing that sometimes youth are leading a lot more work than you realize, and I think there are a lot of great community projects here. I see Shanach Lee back there. I see a lot of different groups who are doing this work who y'all can connect with, maybe move some dollars. So I just want to make that pitch of like fund more young people with fewer restrictions. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Sunny, and we're just each going to give a closing remark, and we just thank you for your time.
Yeah, I just want to say Koyanakpak, big thank you to Rana for helping us be on this stage and have our voices heard in this space. And thank you all, Koyanak, for everyone listening to us and being receptive to what we have to say. Indigenous youth have unique knowledge and experience of being aware of the crossroads we're at with maintaining our culture and traditions and languages, and also being successful in the Western world. But we also have a fresh set of eyes and perspective that are respected in, at least in Inupiaq values, and I'm sure in many other Indigenous values as well, in communities, because we're able to be visionary in our solutions and our ideas for the well-being of our peoples. But youth are also known for kind of like calling out the elephants in the room. I know what I said earlier was a little bit direct, and I think that is simply just like the reality of what it is to work with youth, is being able to be receptive to what could be seen as direct or contradictory to what is kind of like the status quo. So Koyanak for being receptive to that and being willing to listen and work with Indigenous youth, and I hope that we all continue to be dedicated to this work in a good way. Thank you.
Wewina, thank you so much, everybody, for being here and joining us. I just wanted to add that in my perspective, seeding power with Native youth and the projects that I've done and been a part of, it really fosters a sense of purpose and strengthens one's identity and pride in their community. Like I was talking about earlier, the women in my community are so humble. I have made it a point in all of the projects that I've been able to be a part of that have funds to first and foremost pay all of the people involved. And kind of responding to that question, I think that's the biggest, most important thing to be doing, is paying them for their time or even just for talking with you about it. And one thing that Seventh Generation Fund encouraged me to do, and the first time I had ever heard this from a funder, was to pay myself for the work I was doing. Yes. So I think that's really incredible, and thank you all so much.
I think something that came to mind was funding like grassroots groups. I think some of like the people making the biggest change that I've met in Montana are youth, like on the front lines, working for advocacy for, the natural world and protecting our resources from exploitation. And I think back to like extractive filmmaking, I think as a investor, just as an investor, knowing your role and knowing when to like be that bridge, and knowing when it's like, okay, I'm giving this money and this person, and trusting that this person knows what to do with it because they're from the community, and trying to make it not exploitive and more of a partnership. Thank you.
I would just like to again say thank you all for joining us today. I feel so humbled to be able to represent my community in this good and humble way. I also want to say my main life work to date also revolves around Indigenous healing and spirituality, especially as it pertains to children and families. So if there's anybody here who has, anything connections with that, I would love to conversate with anybody here. If you, want to contact me at any point in time, I'm on Facebook. Again, my name is Ambrosia Yellowbird. And if you're interested in learning more about my Auntie's movement, again, the name is Sonish Scouts. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Nyawa.